I would like to talk about a case that occurred in 2020 that shook the whole of Japan. It's not a grotesque murder where someone got chopped up, a stalker-related homicide, nor anything related to serial killers. It shook Japan because it was a case that had to do with brainwashing and fraud, which led to the death of a 5-year-old boy due to starvation and malnutrition. You might automatically think that the boy's parents were the culprits, but you're only half correct. The mother and her friend were found guilty, with the friend receiving a heavier sentence than the mother. I will keep this unbiased and will only say how I personally feel at the very end. I would of course love to hear your opinions on this case, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Japanese names can get confusing, so let me give you the names of the main players in this case. Shojiro, the 5-year-old boy that sadly passed away on April 18, 2020. Rie Ikari, the mother of Shojiro. Emiko Akahori, the friend of Rie Ikari. I don't want to tell you how long Rie and Emiko received in jail until I've told you everything about this case. I want you to hear what they did to this poor 5-year-old child and reflect on what their just punishment should be. Let me clarify that the Japanese legal terms are quite difficult to translate into English because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not familiar with these terms. What I did was use Google Translate, and what I got from that was aggravated manslaughter. However, I looked into a similar case in the US where a mother and father, who were strict vegans, starved their 18-month-old son to death. Mind you, this was not their intention. The mother was still breastfeeding the child, but the only other food they were giving him were fruits and vegetables. If you want to know more about the case, I've posted a link in the description below. The following were what this mother was charged with: first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter, child abuse, 2 counts of child neglect. In 2022, this mother received life in prison. The 18-month-old weighed only 7.5 kilos or 17 pounds, making him about the size of a 7-month-old. Now let's draw some parallels here. At the time of Shojiro's death, he was 5 years old and he weighed only 10 kilos or 22 pounds. If you're not sure what this means, I can put it into perspective for you. I have a daughter who just turned 2 years old and she weighs 11 kilos or 24 pounds. So a 5-year-old boy weighed less than my daughter. Try as I might, I can't even imagine how skinny Shojiro would have been, how weak he was when his final day came. It really breaks my heart, and I can't contain the anger I feel towards these women as I dig deeper into this case and translate all this information for you. The mother and her friend starved Shojiro intentionally as opposed to the other case, so please keep that in mind too when you think about what jail term these 2 women deserve. So, without further ado, let's begin. On April 18, 2020, Rie Ikari's youngest son was found dead due to malnutrition and starvation. On March 2, 2021, almost a year later, Rie and her friend Emiko were arrested. Even when Shojiro's health took a turn for the worst, Rie called Emiko first and foremost instead of the ambulance. I could give you some background on Rie Ikari's life and what kind of person she was, but in all honesty, after doing much research on this case, I couldn't care less. What should be taken into consideration are her actions and the role she played in this case. I will, however, tell you that she got married in her late 20s. Her husband was a hard-working family man who had a steady job. They eventually go on to have 2 boys, and in 2012, they buy a property and build a house in Sasaguri City. This 2-story house built on 200 square meters of land was considered a luxury home in the city. It was 2 years after they moved into their dream home that their 3rd son, Shojiro, was born. They had a swing set in the garden, and in the summer, the inflatable pool was set outside for the boys to play in. Their joy and laughter could be heard in the neighborhood. One of their neighbors stated that the father looked to be a kind and doting father to his boys. So how did things go downhill? Let me introduce to you Emiko Akahori, the friend from hell. Emiko Akahori had broken up Rie Ikari's marriage, overtook her finances, and even her right as a mother to discipline Shojiro. And yet, she seemed to have a happy family life herself. According to one shop that Emiko used to frequent, she used to buy takeaway lunches from them all the time, and she'd come in with her husband and kids. However, she was everything but a pleasant customer. She would call the shop complaining that they weren't given any pepper or didn't have enough chopsticks, and would make the staff come and apologize all the way to their house. Yes, she was that type of woman. A person who knew both Rie and Emiko and their kids tweeted, "There were lots of weird things that I noticed. Shojiro and his two older brothers were so skinny. It wasn't even cold, but they always had jackets on. And Emiko's 3 kids were all overweight. I wish I talked to Shojiro. I'm also in a bit of shock that Emiko had lied to me about her real name and her age." Let me explain in more detail, but to do so, we need to rewind the clock back 7 years to April of 2016. Rie meets Emiko, also a mother of 3, at the kindergarten where Shojiro was attending. Apparently, it was Rie who approached Emiko first because she didn't seem to have many friends. Rie would go out of her way to make Emiko feel included, and I guess she couldn't see Emiko's true character because she was jaded from the start, says another mum. Emiko was a troublemaker. She had no problem lying or scamming others, and money troubles seemed to follow her around. She started telling Rie that other mums were bad-mouthing her behind her back, that Emiko herself was her only true friend. She went as far as to say that her own family members were betraying her. Whatever connection or friendships Rie had with anyone else, Emiko did her best to destroy them with lies upon lies. She told Rie that her husband was having an affair and told her that she wouldn't need any alimony because she'd be entitled to childcare payments from the government as a single mother. This probably perpetuated a lot of distrust within their marriage, and it eventually led to a divorce in May of 2019. Until the untimely death of Shojiro, Rie was a single mother to her 3 boys. Although their friendship started out like all normal friendships, somewhere along the line things took a turn, and it turned into one where Emiko would scold and berate Rie. Eventually, things escalated to a point where Emiko would shut Rie out of her own home and discipline Shojiro. She would hit him and lock him into the closet. All Rie could do was cry outside, completely helpless. Emiko became violent towards Rie too, making her bow down to her at times and beg for forgiveness for whatever she did wrong. She was constantly in Rie's ear saying she needed to save money for legal fees and told her about a man she knew that had ties with the Yakuza. She referred to this man as the boss, and you guessed it, he never existed. But Emiko told Rie how the boss was paying for the private detective to spy on her husband, so Rie had to pay him back. Another time, she told Rie how someone tried to sue her because of some trouble that happened between the kids, and Emiko asked the boss to take care of it, so Rie had to pay 500,000 yen, or approximately $3,800 to the man. And once again, Emiko kept this money for herself. In addition, she made Rie believe that she had to live as if she was poor and couldn't feed the kids properly, so that social welfare will look at their state and give them more money. It was around August 2019, just 3 months after Rie's divorce, that Emiko began to dictate what Rie and her 3 kids were allowed to eat on a daily basis. An example of one of the things she said was to give 1 bowl of rice to the eldest, half a bowl of rice to the middle boy, and none to Shojiro. As if that wasn't enough, she told Rie that the boss was watching her through 12 cameras set around her apartment to make sure they weren't overeating. According to Rie during her trial, she was afraid to ask for help because of the 12 cameras that were set up around her apartment. She knew she was being constantly watched and couldn't do anything to help her kids because if the boss or Emiko found out, she was afraid of what might happen to her children. Just before Shojiro passed away, he couldn't walk any longer from extreme malnutrition. Ried would tell Emiko on several occasions, "Shojiro isn't feeling well," but she would dismiss it all by saying, "He's faking it, he'll be better once he sleeps," and not allow Rie to take him to the hospital. Of the 200,000 yen, or $1,500 that Rie received from the government, Emiko succeeded in keeping 120,000 yen, or $900. Rie handed her all the money she received from the government, and this continued even after Shojiro's death. After food restrictions were put into place in August 2019, things spiraled out of control very quickly. A month later, in September, the elementary school where Rie's two eldest sons were attending noticed that the boys had lost a lot of weight. In October, Rie herself got ill because she wasn't eating enough either, and she went to the ward office to apply for additional financial support because she could no longer work. Emiko aided her to fill all the necessary paperwork, only to steal most of it from her. It got so bad that she couldn't pay the monthly utility bills, which led to their gas and water being stopped. She couldn't pay the rent and barely had enough to eat every day. In November, Shojiro began to be absent from kindergarten a lot, and the teachers there also noticed how skinny he was getting. In December, social services and other related child welfare groups began to suspect child neglect due to the tips they were receiving regarding the three boys. On January of 2020, Emiko began to fear that she might get caught, so she made Rie pull Shojiro out of kindergarten for good. In February, one of Rie's neighbors contacted Child Welfare Services after noticing the strange behaviors of the children. On March 11th, Child Welfare Services went to Rie's house to check on Shojiro. They observed him to be happy, although he was skinny. In late March, Rie and her kids moved to another apartment. On April 13th, the welfare services went to check on the kids again and were told that the kids were doing fine. There's no information whether they actually saw the kids at this time. Up to this point, there were a number of times where Emiko denied them from seeing the kids. On April 18th, only 5 days after their last visit to Rie's apartment, Shojiro was found unconscious in his room. Emiko's husband called the ambulance, but by the time they arrived, Shojiro wasn't breathing. The police were called, and Shojiro passed away at the hospital he was taken to. You might be wondering why Emiko's husband was the one that called the ambulance. On that day, around noon, Shojiro was playing with his older brothers, but around 6:30 in the evening, Shojiro curled up on the floor, unable to move. Rie called Emiko, who arrived a bit after 7 p.m. She touched Shojiro's legs, and he moved in response to the touch, so she told Rie that he was fine and he just needed some sleep, then went back home. 3 hours later, at 10 p.m., Rie realized that Shojiro wasn't breathing, and she called Emiko again. Her and her husband arrived at Rie's house a few minutes later, and that's when her husband called the ambulance. On December 7th, 2020, Emiko was arrested for fraud, and she was prosecuted on 3 other counts after this first arrest. On March 2nd, 2021, almost a year after Shojiro's death, Rie and Emiko were arrested for aggravated manslaughter. It was discovered that Emiko had defrauded Rie approximately 12 million yen, or in US dollars, $90,500 in total, and had bought herself high-end accessories and clothes and used some of it in pachinko, which is a gambling platform here in Japan. Child Welfare Services showed that they had visited and talked to Rie on the phone almost 40 times since they were first alerted, but didn't consider the kids to be in imminent danger and therefore did not intercede. They voiced their regrets after the death of Shojiro became known. The autopsy showed that Shojiro's thymus had shrunk. The thymus gland is a small organ that lies in the upper chest under the breastbone. It makes white blood cells which protect the body against infections. The lack of food and nutrients and heavy stress were determined to be the most likely cause of this. At a later interview, it was discovered that leading up to Shojiro's death, there were times when he went 10 days with nothing but water. More things came to light during the trial. One time, Emiko told Shojiro to climb inside a plastic bag, and she carried him in the plastic bag and locked him in the toilet. Ria wasn't allowed to see him for a few days, and when she was finally allowed to, she cleaned Shojiro from head to toe with a warm cloth, and he just kept saying, "Thank you. Thank you, Mummy." One of his final words to his mum before he died were, "I'm sorry." This really breaks my heart. The innocence of a child can't be more evident in these words to his mother, the mother who played a role in the death of her son. Emiko had also instructed Ria to destroy her phone and destroy whatever evidence there was when Ria was about to be taken into custody for questioning, in hopes of destroying all communication between the two of them. Even after all this was discovered, Emiko denied any wrongdoing and stressed her innocence throughout the entire trial. She denied having any involvement in their food intake and had not an ounce of regret, nor did she have any guilty conscience. 2 months after the tragic death of Shojiro, the police laid out every single lie that Emiko had told Rie. She couldn't believe it, and she says she could never forgive Emiko for it. She has voiced her remorse and guilt, but in my opinion, it's too late. Now, for the verdict. I know this is what you've been waiting for, and I do hope you have a number in your head of how many years each of these women deserve in jail. I'm just going to lay it out nice and simple. Rie Ikari, the mother of Shojiro, was sentenced to 5 years. Emiko Akahori was sentenced to 15 years. Let's take a moment to let that sink in. How do these numbers compare to the ones you had in your head? Does this even make sense to you? They both got a slap on their wrist for what they did. Not even a slap. It was more like a little kiss. I can't for the life of me understand how this is possible. Remember the case I stated at the very beginning of this video about the parents who starved their 18-month-old son to death in the US? The mother received life in prison, and these women get 5 and 15 years? I don't want to say any more because I'm so disappointed in the Japanese legal system. Now, I can understand that most, if not all of you who have listened to this case believe that Rie was also a victim. And maybe she was. But as a mother of 2, I just can't understand how she did nothing to help her children. Shojiro believed in his heart that Rie was there to protect him until the end, and that's evident from his final words to his mother. I don't think anyone could ever convince me that Rie is innocent in all of this. This might be a harsh point of view, and not all of you will agree with me, and that's okay. Nothing makes me more emotional and angry than hearing parents harming and killing their own kids. To me, that is the worst kind of betrayal. I really hope Shojiro is resting in peace, and I wish one of the adults had stepped in to help him and his older brothers. The teachers at the elementary school, the teachers at the kindergarten, the neighbors and other friends, Ria's entire family, her husband, not to mention the social workers. These kinds of cases aren't uncommon in Japan or overseas. We, as individuals, really need to open our eyes and protect our innocent children. And with that, I hope you hug your children tight tonight and thank your parents for taking such good care of you. And please, if you ever see something suspicious around you, do something. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon.